All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. This is our final event of the Eco Evenings series. And my name is Dylan Yates, and I work with the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. The Nova Scotia Environmental Network is a non-for-profit organization which was established in 1991. We have a membership of 30-plus environmental organizations and many members as well, whose common purpose is to conserve and enhance the natural environment and build a sustainable future for Nova Scotia. As an organization, we strive to support and strengthen and promote the environmental work of our members by connecting them to each other, to governments, and to the general public, and by hosting events such as this. So this event is being facilitated by Jessica LeBlanc, Program Manager, and Amanda Sorellis, Program Coordinator from the Foundation of Environmental Stewardship. And I'm going to hand things off to Jess and Amanda.
Yes, hi everyone, welcome. Thank you to everyone who has been here with us for 3 nights now. This is the last of this 3 Eco Evening series. So we're really excited, as Dylan mentioned. My name's Jess, and I actually have my colleague Amanda online with us as well. And we work for the Foundation for Environmental Stewardship, and we're a youth-led, youth-serving, non-for-profit organization. And our mission is really to create a sustainable future by empowering youth. So specifically supporting them via educational programs, funding programs, mentorship programs. So feel free to check us out if you're interested. But yes, similarly to when we saw you last, probably on Tuesday, we're going to be facilitating tonight's session. And there's going to be a lot of information coming at you, and then a very fun Q&A, hopefully, where we can open the floor up to everyone here to ask their burning questions. Amanda is going to be taking notes today. So if you are looking for kind of a nice summary document at the end of this 3-day event, you're trying to retain it all and have it as a bit of a takeaway, she will be having that sent over via email. So don't worry too much about taking notes tonight, just be present. And before we actually kick anything off, I would love to bring in and introduce Jeff Ward. He is the general manager of the Member 2 Heritage Park, and he's the former director of operations for Metapanagia Mi'kmaq Nation. And he'll actually be saying our opening prayer and a land acknowledgement for us today. So I shall hand it off to you, Jeff.
Hello, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. How's she going? Who's your father? Bye. Oh, come to how. I like to speak as many languages as I can and to welcome everybody here in a good way. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land at which we gather on virtually, and I'm assuming that you're in the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Now, this territory is covered by treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, or Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized the Indigenous title and established the rules for what was going to be an ongoing relationship of peace, friendship, and mutual respect between nations, and between nations for 2 very different modes of life and land use. We are all treaty people. As I lit some sage earlier, I want to send prayers to all, and I want to welcome everybody here in an old way, in a traditional way, because a prayer is a song and a song is a prayer. And this chant is a spiritual language. Sometimes we have Mi'kmaq words or even English words, but this is all spiritual. It goes like this. I'm going to sing 2 songs. First one is going to be about bringing us together. And this is an old song that would push away anything that is negative and allow positive spirits. And it's almost, there's a word in there that sounds, and it's identical to the English word, ego. Sometimes we have to leave our ego at home or at the door or in the car. So when we come together, we want to leave that ego and push it away and allow us to come together in a good way. And then the second song is a welcome song. And it brings people together in a good way. And it starts off slow, and that's the elders coming in their full regalias. Regalia, very important word, regalia. Not a costume, it's a regalia. And then it goes a little faster. Well, that's us coming in, we're dancing. We think we got it, but arthritis is setting in. And then it's a little faster. Well, that's you younger people, and you know you got it. You're showing off. And then it's really fast at the end. That's all our kids coming in, the grandchildren, and they're full of energy and just amazing. So send love to all of those people in your life. Igo, igande, igo, igo, igande, igo, igo, igande, hegando daya, hey, ya, hey, oh. Igo, ando daya, hey, igo, igande, hegando daya, hey, ya, hey, oh. Guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de he, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de he, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de he, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de ya, guano de he, guano danes, guano de he, guano de he, guano de he, guano de ya, Tahoe. In our language, we say Tahoe. We raise our left arm as close as, because they're connected right to our heart as a nerve. We say Tahoe. It's just like saying hallelujah or yeehaw. Yeehaw, right? I studied your people in social studies. Covered wagons, square dancing. Anyway, it was awesome to be here tonight. I want to invite everybody to Member 2 Heritage Park. Come to Member 2, come to our gift shop. You get 10% off everything in the gift shop here tonight. Hope to see you all soon. Come on in for a tour anytime. Thank you. I'm so honored to be a part of this and what we're doing. And you guys are all doing great work. And I always believe whenever I meet an environmentalist, you were indigenous in your past life. You were Ilnu. So that's just my personal theory, but you're doing God's work. You're doing work for the creator.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you. Commencing, yes, thanks for bringing this commencing the evening's events today. Now I guess we'll just move right into the speaker portion of the event. So we are actually going to be talking, I hope as many of you know, about Indigenous protected conserved areas tonight. And we have 3 very special guests with us. And as I kind of start to introduce our speakers briefly here, they're just going to hopefully give us a quick little wave so you can put names to faces. And with us today to start off, we have Allison McIsaac, who is a research coordinator at Eskasoni Fish and Wildlife Commission. We also have Allie Rivers, who is the IPCA project coordinator at the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. And last but not least, we have Trish Nash, who is the IPCA program manager at the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. So they're going to be presenting for us tonight for approximately about a half hour. So sit tight, get comfy, and then we're going to move into that question and answer period and open the floor up to everybody else. And a little bit of housekeeping items just before I officially hand it off is that I know many of us are probably familiar with Zoom. We've been doing Zoom meetings for a long time now. But just as a reminder, we'd hope that everyone kind of stays muted while our presenters are talking today. There will be time for questions at the end, but feel free to use the chat box as much as possible if you have comments. Just remember, let's all try and be kind and respectful tonight in the chat box, as well as just how we behave on Zoom tonight. As well as another kind of tip, if you're not aware, it's really helpful to change your view to speaker view. So if you hover over your Zoom screen and you click the view button in the top right and you change it to speaker, it's kind of nice because then instead of seeing all the gallery, you can just see who's speaking. So feel free to change that. And if anyone has any questions or if they're having any tech issues, again, we have lots of people online in this chat box ready to help you out, Amanda being one of the main ones, but feel free to just send us a message in there and we can see if we can troubleshoot for you. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for housekeeping, unless there's anything else anyone can think of. And I will officially hand it off.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen, Jess.
Beautiful.
And I'll hand it off to you, Allison.
All right, thanks very much. On behalf of Trish and Allie, I'd like to thank the NSEN for inviting us to participate in tonight's Eco Evening. I'd also like to thank Jeff for starting us off in such an amazing way. In tonight's session, we will focus on the identification and establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas in the present day Nova Scotia portion of Mi'kma'ki. We will go into some detail about what guides an IPCA and some of the work that we are doing to establish IPCAs. Allie is working on establishing IPCAs on the mainland, and Trish and I are working on IPCAs here in Unama'ki, or Cape Breton. There are other projects being led by Indigenous communities and organizations across Canada, as well as in other countries around the world. It's important to be aware that IPCAs across Canada will be as unique as the ecosystems and Indigenous peoples that encompass them. Though approaches may differ, there are several essential elements of an IPCA, which we will detail as we go through our presentation this evening. IPCAs represent an opportunity for Indigenous people to uphold the responsibilities that are intertwined with inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights. As explained by an elder, these responsibilities include an obligation to Mother Earth, our First Nations communities and leadership, our children and our grandchildren. So how do we establish an IPCA? Currently, there is no federal or provincial legislation or framework that addresses Indigenous protected and conserved areas. However, there is historical and more current recognition of the rights of Indigenous people. The Mi'kmaq have signed peace and friendship treaties, as Jeff mentioned, with the Crown that set out long-standing promises, mutual obligations, and benefits for both parties, which means that we are all treaty people, and we all have a vested interest in protecting ecosystems for future generations. Internationally, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has a strong bearing on the establishment, governance, and management of Indigenous protected areas, as it affirms the rights of Indigenous people. In fact, most of the 46 articles of UNDRIP apply to IPCAs and can be described as 7 broad and mutually reinforcing bundles of rights. These rights include human rights and freedoms, including individual and collective rights of women, men, elders, youth, and children, self-governance, sovereignty, self-determination, and decision-making, including free, prior, and informed consent, ownership, use, and management of territory, land, and resources, and which also refers to a means of subsistence and development and engagement in both traditional and economic activities. These bundles also include affirmation of a right to culture and religion, which includes traditional knowledge, customs, maintaining and protecting sacred spaces and other cultural sites, as well as maintaining spiritual relationships with the territory itself. Another is customary institutions and the exercise of customary law, protecting the environment and maintaining the environmental integrity and capacity within the territory, development, including Indigenous-based developmental goals consistent with identity, culture, needs, and aspirations. So these are some of the supports that can be found internationally. In Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission call to action, specifically Article 43, also supports IPCAs through its call upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to fully adopt and implement UNDRIP as the framework for reconciliation. These are just some of the international and national mechanisms that affirm Indigenous rights and support the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in protecting the ecosystem for future generations. IPCAs will help shift the old ways of protecting spaces to a new Indigenous-led way of protecting spaces. And now I'll pass it over to Trish.
Thanks, Allison. As Jeff kind of mentioned in the beginning, when the treaties were signed, there's always been differences in worldview. And as far as protected areas are concerned, the colonial approach is to protect wilderness or special places by restricting people's access. The Mi'kmaq, however, see people as an intrinsic part of the environment with the spiritual kinship to plants, animals, land, rocks, and water. So what is important is to have a relationship with every part of the earth. 10 years ago, the Mi'kmaq worked with the province of Nova Scotia to identify and designate a number of areas for the Protected Areas 13% project. Giving it back to you, Allison.
Okay, sorry, slow getting at the mute button. At one of EFWC's meetings, one elder remarked, "The land does not belong to us, we belong to the land." And these concepts, and as well as Mi'kmaq guiding principles, such as using the gifts provided by the Creator for the well-being of the individual and the community, and two-eyed seeing, which is using the strength from one worldview along with Indigenous knowledge to basically make the most, you take the best and learn from it. And so at another meeting, Chief Leroy noted that we don't have the luxury of living in the ecosystem of the past. We need to take an ecosystem approach to manage our activities, and this approach will incorporate Mi'kmaq and Western science perspectives. This sentiment gives a nice perspective into how two-eyed seeing can support the development of IPCAs, which will require the building of relationships within communities, Indigenous groups, federal and provincial government, NGOs, and industry, depending on the area in question. To help guide the building of these relationships, we can look to the concept of ethical space, which can bridge the differences in worldviews, as Trish mentioned, and develop a framework of dialogue with the overarching goal of reconciling with Mother Earth and protecting the environment for future generations.
So Indigenous people have been caring for the land since time immemorial. And, that hasn't changed over time, that hasn't changed over time. The Indigenous people continue to care for the land. And with that being said, there's always been limitations for everyone in conserving land and water, and usually that comes down to a little bit of money. And really, conservation targets internationally and feeding down to the national level have really created that funding and the space to be able to promote Indigenous-led conservation. So one of these national targets is by 2020, at least 17% of terrestrial areas and inland water and 10% of marine and coastal areas of Canada are conserved through networks of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. So now, every year we're committing to more and more land and water protections, and the federal government has now committed to protecting 30% of both terrestrial areas and inland water, as well as 30% of marine and coastal areas by 2030. So what is an IPCA? And everyone's kind of touched on this a little bit so far, but IPCAs are lands and waters where Indigenous governments have the primary role in protecting and conserving ecosystems through Indigenous laws and governance systems. IPCAs can vary in terms of governance and management objectives, but they generally share three essential elements. They're Indigenous-led, represent a long-term commitment to conservation, and elevate Indigenous rights and responsibilities. But really, the heart and soul of an IPCA are culture and language. And just the little picture here I have on the right is a screenshot of the We Rise Together report. And I would advise anyone who has any little bit of time or really enjoys reading to take a look at that report to really get an understanding of, what IPCAs are and could be, and, some of the recommendations that they've made to provincial, territorial, municipal, and federal governments on how to support IPCAs and Indigenous communities and nations across Canada. But in Nova Scotia, it's just important to note that there is no legal backing right now associated with the designation of an area of an IPCA. So there is no legislation that currently protects an area as an IPCA. So IPCAs are intended to promote a modern application of Indigenous values, laws, and knowledge systems, access to and use of land and water, protection of spaces, species, and food security, reconnection or connection of the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the land and water, and revitalization of Indigenous languages and culture. And as Trish mentioned earlier, IPCAs are not a copy paste of the past colonial approach to protecting land and water by protecting wilderness from people. Back to you, Trish.
Okay, so the Mi'kmaq have identified 7 priority sites in Nova Scotia to investigate as possible IPCAs. 5 of these sites are on the mainland and 2 in Unama'ki. And we'll be learning a bit more about these sites later on in the presentation. The Canada Nature Fund is supporting 27 IPCA projects across Canada. And one of these projects is in Nova Scotia, where Crown governments are working with the Mi'kmaq and environmental groups to establish a connected network of protected areas across the province. So IPCAs will be one part of this network. Here's just a chart of the Mi'kmaq IPCA project, which is led by the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs and coordinated by 3 groups: the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, Eskasoni Fish and Wildlife Commission, and the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. To allow the Mi'kmaq to actually hold and purchase private lands, a Mi'kmaq-led land trust, the Cespedes Dominege Gimitkanu Conservancy, is being developed to ensure important lands are protected for future generations to enjoy.
And on that note, is the question, why the Cespedes Dominege Gimitkanu Conservancy? Why was that established? So Cespedes Dominege Gimitkanu means taking care of our homeland territory. So over 70% of Nova Scotia is privately owned, making private land securement essential to establishing IPCAs in the province. The Conservancy is a Mi'kmaq-led land trust that aims to secure and protect private land. So this Conservancy very much plays a similar role to other land trusts in Nova Scotia, including Nova Scotia Nature Trust, Nature Conservancy of Canada, and Ducks Unlimited Canada. And this Conservancy was incorporated as a society officially on March 1st of this year.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the Glooscap IPCA. We'll go on to the next slide. Maybe if I can get mine to coordinate. Okay. In 2020, we held a number of engagement sessions with the 5 Unama'ki Mi'kmaq communities. This included elders, other knowledge holders, and youth. And we discussed the concept of what an IPCA would be in Unama'ki. And we developed an IPCA decision-making framework. And we also confirmed that Glooscap's cave was a priority site. So in the middle, you can see the cover of the summary report that we prepared. And you can find this on the UINR website. It's called the Dandilotic, and it's going to guide IPCA work in Unama'ki. And one of a really exciting thing that just happened in January of this year was UINR purchased the first parcel of land for an IPCA in Nova Scotia. Okay, so this is the IPCA decision-making framework that was developed, and it consists of 4 different themes. So governance, Mi'kmaq values, education, and the green economy. And underneath each one of these themes are important elements that have been identified. And the picture in the middle is a Mi'kmaq youth that is in front of the maiden who was turned to stone at Glooscap's cave. Okay, so the Glooscap IPCA is grounded in the legend of Glooscap, who is a spiritual hero who guided the Mi'kmaq. Glooscap's cave is considered the center of the universe and is where Glooscap will return one day. Other features in the island are Glooscap's canoe, or the Bird Islands, and Glooscap Mountain, where the little people live. So originally we started out with Glooscap Cave, but if you look at the map to the right, we've now identified an area of interest that includes all the features. And in this area also includes a complex number of jurisdictions, federal, provincial, municipal, and it also includes a number of different land tenures. So wilderness area, crown lands, private lands, and it's approximately 5,000 hectares in size. Okay. As part of the Glooscap IPCA development, we've also identified the importance of connectivity. So we're hoping to establish a land, sea, sky corridor that will allow unimpeded movement of animals and people. So there's 2 corridors proposed, one from the Glooscap IPCA to the Brador Biosphere Reserve, and also the IPCA to the Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Allison.
Thanks, Trish. So EFWC is coordinating the efforts to develop an IPCA in and around Eskasoni First Nation. If you could move to the next slide, please, Allie. So since the around 2011, there's been an ad hoc group in Eskasoni to address environmental issues. But this group became a little bit more established in 2017 after we had a series of floods within the community in 2016. So we've had a series of meetings, and the goal was to identify indicators of climate change for the purpose of land use planning within the community. The participants represented elders, youth, traditional resource users, Mi'kmaq foresters, band leadership, band staff, other First Nations organizations, and other non-Mi'kmaq organizations, as well as external experts who could discuss some of the issues that were happening within the watershed. It was identified early that it was extremely important to include the Mi'kmaq language throughout the initiative, as well as the youth. So our committee, which is now our guiding committee for our IPCA project, is called the Wabi-Diag Committee. And it's a name that's derived from something that the youth developed The acronym is EYES Open, which stands for Eskasoni Youth and Elders Solving Our Present Ecosystem Needs. And this is the group that we are using to guide our project at the moment. During this series of meetings, several ecosystem health indicators were identified, and the meeting participants in general felt that they were all equally important. They included language and ecological knowledge, its use and sharing of, including incorporating Mi'kmaq names of places and species into our work, and engagement and education of youth. It also included water quality and quantity, including the water infrastructure and treatment within the community, the management of forest activities, both to protect groundwater supply and protect other biodiversity issues, to mitigate extreme weather events such as flooding, and then to learn more about the area. So focus on forest size, composition, species and inventory and age class, as well as diversity, and look at some of the issues that are coming about from invasive species. We're losing our beech trees in and around Eskasoni because of an invasive species, and we have other concerns as well. During the sessions, our elders reminded us that how we treat the land is what it will give back to you. So the vision of our project is to protect the Eskasoni watershed, which is an area rich in culture, biodiversity, and critical habitat, and also to provide a space where healing can begin through reconciliation and reconnection of the people with the land. Some other key messages that the committee, I guess, identified throughout the course of our meetings was that if we protect the forest, we will protect the water, and protecting the environment protects the people and all our relations. So this kind of just is a great example of how holistic the committee was thinking and how everything is interconnected. So we may be focusing on protecting the drinking water or the watershed in general, but it's really about protecting the ecosystem and the interaction that people have with that ecosystem. And ultimately, the watershed has been identified as an integral area to protect, and then that's why it was put forth as an IPCA. As we move forward with this initiative, we will consider frameworks and plans for governance and effective management, including the development of healing spaces, educational opportunities such as land-based learning, traditional use of species, research and monitoring, stewardship, including restoration of clear-cutted areas, and as well as any other issues that are identified as important to the community. Our project will focus both on traditional practices as well as more current uses of the land. For example, we have identified areas that are important for medicinal use or traditional harvesting practices, but we've also identified areas that are currently used for ATV use and hiking. So we would like to further explore the area and develop those further so that people can connect it with the land in a way that is meaningful to them. So our particular IPCA is a mix of Crown land and private land. Most of it is Crown land, and it encompasses the reserve. So on the map, the blue line is the watershed, and the light blue is the proposed IPCA area with the reserve and nestled into it, and it all connects to the Bredor Lake. So in total, we're hoping to be able to protect about 9,000 hectares.
So lastly on the agenda here for examples, I'll touch a little bit on what's going on the mainland. We're definitely at a different rate of speed than Unama'ki in this. There's been a lot of conversations over the years around the Eskasoni watershed and the Glooskap's Cave area. So a lot of the things that both Allison and Trish had talked about, that they've been doing. I'm very much doing those same things as well, just at a different stage. So where I'm at a different stage in things here with communities, most of the sites I can't really kind of, give you exact locations as to roughly where they would be, because, we're not at that point with communities and their comfort levels with that information being released. So what I can kind of give you an idea of is just a little bit more of a sense of the importance of these areas. So all of the areas that I'm helping support communities protect are areas that are important cultural and ecological landscapes. They contain culturally important sites and features, have many archaeologically rich areas, have species of importance to the Mi'kmaq, including medicines, food, and crafting species, also federally and/or provincially listed species at risk, stands of old growth forest, and areas requiring healing through restoration. And all of these areas are threatened by different things for various reasons. So there's areas of unsustainable forestry practices, there's installation and maintenance of dams, dikes, and other infrastructure, mineral exploration and mining, policy gaps, which are not only felt on the mainland, but all across Nova Scotia, including lack of strong protections and enforcement of those protections, and also restricted access and use, invasive species, as well as climate change. So what we're working at right now is developing working groups and advisory bodies to really help ensure that, these, I'm sorry, you might be able to hear my cat in the background here, making sure that all of this entire process is community-led, it is Mi'kmaq-led, and it's composed of Mi'kmaq community members, including elders and youth, so getting all demographics involved and having a conversation. And these groups are providing recommendations to support Mi'kmaq leadership, which includes chief and councils involved in these discussions, as well as the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs in their decision-making in advancing IPCAs on the mainland. Discussion topics include history and importance of the area, potential delineations of the area, governance mechanisms, stewardship planning and priorities, land prioritization, and ultimately the recognition of the IPCA. And I kind of made a little bit of a diagram on the right here to show that, all of these steps are connected. And this does not necessarily show the order that, all of these things are going to be learned or figured out, but they all feed into IPCAs and one another at different points in time. So like with anything else, there's always challenges. This is definitely not an exhaustive list of all the challenges to date or to come, but these are just, our little Cliff's Notes version for now. So we are, as Jeff has mentioned, in the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and land ownership is a foreign concept to the Mi'kmaq. Differences in worldview and the concept of conservation is always a challenge, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation. The existing land trust model in Canada uses a colonial approach to land securement. The amount of time to carry out land transactions takes a long time, especially when you have a condensed time frame with funding involved with that. Costs associated with long-term care of the land through administration, legal fees, surveys, property taxes, and also just access to long-term funding for the long-term care of the land. And with that, Walalio, everyone. And I guess, Jess, this is kind of your ball game here. So we are open to have the floor for questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess for this Q&A period, first off, thank you ladies so much. I've learned so much from this presentation. I really appreciate that. And the PowerPoint was helpful as well. I guess as we kind of go into the Q&A period here, maybe the best way to kind of tackle this, we've got quite a few people in the session today. So maybe what would be good is if you have a question, if you could raise your hand using the reaction button. So at the bottom of your screen, it's that little happy face thing with a plus. And if you click that and you raise your hand, you will be, Jeff has demonstrated so beautifully up here. We'll be able to see then that you have a question, and then we can kind of call upon everybody one by one. And yeah, we can kind of start it off that way. Jeff, do you actually have a question? Would you like to add or comment?
Yes, I do.
Beautiful.
The concept that you brought up of land ownership versus colonial. However, have you ever talked and spoken with, or even looked at the history of the Santi Maui? Because territories was a very big thing about, it wasn't about owning the land, but territories were set by the Santi Maui, the Grand Council. They were set. So we always had hunting grounds set for families and for, now it didn't belong to an individual, but it belonged to a family. So that story of territories, because I believe, and this is one thing that we say here at the history, at the Heritage Park, is that territories was a really big thing. You never hunted in my territory, and if you did, you broke the law. And there was things that had to be done and things that had to be said. So the whole concept, yeah, we don't own a tree. We don't own the land. It's all living. I don't own my children. I help raise them. I pay for them, but I don't own them. I don't own my wife. She just tells me what to do. I say, yes, dear. Now, but when it comes to territories, that's another concept that nobody's talking about. And the Santi Maui was all about that. The Grand Council decided. And that's why Santi Maui was so important, was because of that territories. So I'm just wondering in your studies, or if that's a concept that's practically new that I'm bringing up, but I think it's something that we should look at because it puts more, because the whole, it's also like nomadic. I don't use the word nomadic in our center or in my history or any of my papers, because I don't believe we were ever nomadic at any time in history. We had a summer home and we had a winter home, and we had a spring and fall camp. You know, just like people go down south and then stay up at snowbirds, we invented that whole concept. Popcorn, you're welcome again. You know, maple syrup, that great Canadian game, hockey. These are all inventions that are not out there. So anyway, I just want to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for mentioning that. I think it's a really important thing. And when we developed our committee, we actually do include members of the Grand Council. But again, it's something that we have to really consider, and how we're going to strengthen that relationship. So I think it's great that you brought that up. Thank you.
Are there any other questions out there in the crowd for now? Oh, Tina?
Thanks. And thanks to all of you for those presentations and for the comments. I'm wondering, like, Allie, you mentioned this in particular, but it goes to everybody. Allie, you were speaking about legal recognition and the fact that currently in Nova Scotia, you know, we don't have legislation in place that would kind of through the province's laws kind of protect in the way that, say, wildlife areas or, you know, protected places are protected under Nova Scotian legislation. So I'm wondering, insofar as you can share, any of you, you know, what kinds of conversations are being had about what ideally the assembly might like, or what, you know, what individual chiefs and councils might like, or, you know, what your own institutions might like in terms of thinking about having some formal recognition in place in terms of legal recognition that's set out that could help to make sure that there's no encroachments by the province, for example, or the federal government once an area has been set up.
I can take a stab at that. For the Glooscap area, we're not really going to look at legislation. We're kind of negotiating with each one of the different partners. So for the wilderness area, we have a co-governance group with the Mi'kmaq and the province and we've developed a shared understanding document on that will dictate how the relationship will move forward. So, yeah, so we also have the same sort of situation with the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. So to us, everything is about relationships, and developing the relationships with the private landowners, because there's, Canadian citizens, American citizens that own land in the IPCA, and everyone is very supportive and wants to be part of the IPCA. So yeah, the only reason really we have to have the Conservancy is because the Mi'kmaq can't really own land, and this is the only mechanism that we can do to hold land. So it's trying, I guess, to bridge both the colonial and the Mi'kmaq traditional way to secure land for the future. I don't know if that helps, but we're actually not even thinking about legislation for Glooscap, at least.
That does help. Thank you. That's interesting.
Awesome. And just a reminder to everyone, if you are uncomfortable with sharing your audio and video, if you're not able to, you can always put your questions in the chat box as well. And then we can take them from there if that's a little bit easier. I guess I have a question maybe to get us going here a bit as well. I'm curious to hear what maybe some of your calls to action are for youth. I know education is a huge part of this, kind of decolonizing education, specifically unlearning many things, and kind of growing that culture and language that you're talking about that is so crucial to these IPCAs. So I guess, what would your call to action be for youth that are looking to get engaged with this, looking to support IPCAs, no matter where they are in Canada, but also in Nova Scotia? And yeah, what your thoughts are on that? I don't know who would like to take that.
I can go again if everybody's being shy. Yeah, no, like youth are critical. We have youth involved in every aspect. So we have youth involved in community engagements. We reach out to youth. We have a youth representative on our IPCA communications committee. We try to involve youth as much as possible. It's funny because yesterday we were having a conversation. Like for the Glooscap IPCA, we want to work with schools and have on the land training and just get people back and youth out on the land to build that relationship again. But we're, even in our consultations, elders were saying, like, let's look at ways to engage youth through technology. So whether we have like a virtual tour of the Glooscap area that kids can look on their computers, or get youth involved with generating some of the ideas on how to reach other youth. So the sky's the limit, I think, as far as youth can be involved. All they have to do, if anyone's interested, is just reach out to us.
You're like, oh, I'm asking those questions. Fair enough. I guess on that note as well, I think Allie, it was you that mentioned it, land-based learning. Do you mind maybe elaborating a little bit what that could look like, and maybe what we could encourage through other educational systems that we are a part of right now, even, and how we could push that forward a little bit more?
Well, kind of like what Trish was saying, is just enter any opportunity to get the youth involved in any way, shape, or form, and getting them onto the land and the water, and just getting your hands dirty, just doing different things, whether it's working in a greenhouse, bringing up traditional medicines and things like that, which some of our organizations are doing that, planting black ash and things like that for crafting, the long-term survival of crafting species. We have all of our organizations have earth keepers or indigenous guardians that they are Mi'kmaq youth who are really connecting with all of the other youth in the area to say, hey, this is not only just a great thing to do, but a potential career. You could literally for the rest of your life just care for the land. And really, like Trish said, the sky is a limit. Like there are no limitations with land-based learning. It's learning about culture on the land, learning about language on the land, like having elders and youth and people of all backgrounds like in one place learning together, like pushing, you know, not pushing, sorry, like, you know, having two-eyed seeing events. Like we actually recently had a land and water protection training camp for youth, and, you know, talking about the virtual component, Trish, we actually had like virtual reality headsets where they actually got to like swim with salmon and things like that, like getting them really interested, you know, seeing how water quality is tested. And they were just really, really engaged and really excited about just getting out there. And, you know, it would be great if COVID would just kind of bugger off so we can really start to get out there and do these things all the time. And, you know, things are back to normal, but, you know, we're working through all of that. And, you know, I have youth also involved in working groups as well. And we're starting to get out to different areas to, you know, learn about, you know, invasive species, like connect with culture, like getting to actually see Mi'kmaq petroglyphs and things like that, like connecting everything all together. And, you know, I'm definitely not the person to ask about land-based learning, like, because I don't have too much experience in it, but just from others that I work alongside, and from Trish and Allison, it's so integral to IPCAs to have the youth involved in whatever way they want to be, whether it's just, you know, talking to them and they learn a little bit, and then, you know, in a few years they take it somewhere else, whether they, you know, apply it to a job, go to university, or just, you know, enjoy connecting with the land through whatever means. So yeah, I'll stop there, but it's, yeah, the options are literally endless.
That was really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so cool to hear about all the synergies between tech and this knowledge as well, like virtual realities, watching salmon, like what? That's so cool. Amanda, I think maybe you might have a question.
Yeah, first of all, that sounds really awesome. I put that in the chat. I was like, I want to do that. I would definitely be down. I was just a little bit curious as to kind of your career paths and how you came into the role and joined IPCAs, and how you really got involved with the like the community, and how this became such a passion. So I'm kind of just interested to hear, I guess, each of your stories. I don't know who wants to start.
I was going to say, who wants to start? Okay, I will. So I started with Eskasoni a number of years ago. When I was fresh out of school, I came on as an oyster technician. It was an unpaid work term, and I volunteered, and I became a summer student. I worked on the oyster farm for a number of years, and then I became the coordinator for the research and supervisor. And now I coordinate their research. So it's anything from lobster to salmon to helping install river deflectors to improve the river quality for fish passage. So my background is mostly aquatic, but I'm just starting to come into the terrestrial landscape now, other than the riverbank with this IPCA. And I'm really involved with this project because it's so important to the community, and it is something that everybody wants to see, from leadership to elders and youth. They want to see the land protected. They want the water protected for future generations. And it's just really, it's going to be amazing to have these areas protected. Glooscap is an extremely important cultural site, and to have these areas protected from a Mi'kmaq perspective, from the Mi'kmaq worldview, is, I think, the most exciting part of this. I can't get too excited over purchasing land. That's just not an area that I ever thought I would be involved in. But the fact that this land is going to go towards conservation. And when Eskasoni Fish and Wildlife first started, our motto was conserve and protect. And it was all about the land and the species. And connection that the people had to the land and the water and the species. And our focus was the food, social, and ceremonial fishery, and we've just expanded it as the community needed us to. And you know, it's definitely a passion of mine, because right now it's very busy. But that's kind of how I ended up here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And then I'll let Trish or Allie go next.
Yeah, I can go next. So I was raised in Southern Ontario in the territory of my Indigenous ancestors, and I just love nature and always was in nature and grew up for great respect for nature. So the next step after I graduated from high school was to go to university, and I did, and I got a degree in zoology. But again, it was a really different worldview for me. Being a scientist, everything was very theoretical, where people were kind of at the top of the hierarchy, and you could not put any emotion into any of your work or have any connection to anything, which was the complete opposite of how I was raised. So I had that struggle all the time. And so I started working in my own territory, the Grand River Conservation Authority. And then I moved to Northern Quebec, and I worked with Indigenous groups there. Then over to Labrador, and I've worked with Inuit groups there. And I just love working with Indigenous groups and the respect for the land and the water. And then the opportunity came up here a couple of years ago to work for UINR on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And this is really new. It's kind of new globally and new in Canada. So it was really exciting, and it was a way to work with another Indigenous group. So yeah, it's just been amazing. I would just recommend to youth out there, go with whatever you're passionate about. There hasn't really been a day in my career, and it's been pretty long, that I haven't really enjoyed what I do, and that is key. So like Allison said, if you think you have an interest in something, go volunteer and get to know people and look at opportunities, and just, you know, go and experience anything as far as life and what you're interested in. And, you know, it can be amazing. That's it.
Thanks. That was so inspirational. All right. And then
Yeah, how do I follow that? So for me, like same as Trish, like I grew up, I spent a lot of my time outside in the woods and just in nature, and just everything always intrigued me, and I was always asking questions. And then that kind of, I don't know, it felt right when I started moving towards like biology and natural sciences and things like that. And I went to university, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to specialize in once the door opened, because I majored in biology, but that wasn't enough. I took some courses in oceanography, got in like an ocean sciences minor, and then just saw so many different connections in different areas that I'm just like, I just kept going, wanting to understand, you know, how do you fix things that, you know, seem so irreparable right now. And I overcomplicate things all the time. I look at things, I get way too far up in the clouds. And I'm like, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? I love trying to solve problems. And then that kind of led me to be able to get an environmental impact assessment certificate. So kind of applying all of that knowledge in my future or my, you know, next careers there was really, really useful, because I just found that everything that I did and just or learned and just always asking questions just made my opinions constantly change, and you know, you really need to be able to do that. You can't just be totally set in one way. It's like, this is the way that things are, because it's never a good line of thinking. You got to be open-minded and adaptable. So I mean, my degree and my job so far kind of are mirror images. I've been all over the place. I worked in agriculture, did like a bunch of co-ops through there, and like on soil and blueberries and like chickens. Like that's where I got started. And then I was like, this is great, but I want to try something else. So then I did a little bit of like fisheries observing, a very short stint. I don't do good with boats, like way out there. You know, worked in aquaculture. Like I got to see so many different sides of different industries and places. Like I just felt that every time a challenge came up, I was like, oh, either, you know, I learned a certain skill here or a certain understanding there that kind of helped me understand things better. I don't make sense half the time either. So sorry, everyone. But yeah, I did some environmental monitoring and did some courses at Dal, and I really, really like birds. Like people go nuts when I'm out in the woods with them, because I'm just like, I hear a bird and I look and I'm like, sorry, we need to finish this 2-kilometer hike, not like 4 hours later. And I think just, I have only been working with CMM for 3.5 years. I started as or in a position working on salmon conservation, and as much as I like all of the environment and the aquatics, the terrestrial side started to pull me in a little bit more, and this job opportunity within the organization just came up, and I was like, yes, I want to try something different. This sounds like kind of what I've been building towards, and starting to be able to look at all the different pieces of the puzzle in like one bigger picture, and not only ever be looking at one little piece of that puzzle. And it's been challenging. Like, you know, there's no roadmap to this, but working with the communities has been really, really great. I am a non-Indigenous person helping facilitate this process with communities and being guided by them and learning all of these things from them. It's so inspirational and empowering, and I couldn't have asked for a better job.
I love it. Look at all of this inspiration. I feel like these have been such great, I guess, like stories, and I appreciate all of you sharing your histories with us. And I guess to any of the students that are in the audience too, I feel like we can really learn from the opportunities to volunteer and engage in your communities from Allison, and following your passions from Trish, and then just being willing to keep asking why and helping your communities like with Allie. So these are really great learnings, and thank you so much for answering my question.
And I think maybe, I don't see any questions in the chat, but I know Michaela, you had messaged and you said you might have a question, and that might be then our last one.
Yeah, thank you. So this might be geared better towards Allie, as she just mentioned, she has background in oceanography and marine sciences, but anyone else can feel free to answer. How do you think some of the practices of IPCAs could be implemented into marine protected areas, MPAs? As you know, the terrestrial land has an influence on coastlines, the marine environment. So how could you see, like, is there any similarities between the two, or is there any areas you see need to be strengthened between the two protected areas?
I'll start with this, Trish, but I'm going to let you work into this one because this is your jam right now. So what we're really trying to do is to not create a separation between land and water, any water, whether it's inland, marine, coastal, otherwise. And, you know, just the way that federal, provincial government systems work is they always split the departments into, like, you know, land and water, and it's siloed and they don't talk to one another. But, you know, that's not the Mi'kmaq world view. Like, you know, everything is connected and you know, what you're doing in one area impacts another. So it's just making sure that we're always looking at these places from a landscape lens. Like, Trish, I'll kind of let you go in from here, because this, with the Glooskap's Cave area, like you can really see that land and seascape example. But it's just the one thing before I give it over to you, Trish, is for me personally, and it kind of touches back on the question about legislation, is, you know, there's a lot of policy gaps, including legislation gaps. And, you know, legislation is a dangerous thing because it's very restrictive, or it has been, and will likely continue to be. And we don't want to put IPCAs in a situation where a provincial or federal minister has the overall say in how the areas are managed or governed or what have you, because that is not the purpose of an IPCA. It's Indigenous-led. The areas are identified by Indigenous nations or communities. You know, the entire process and the caring for the land, like, it's in the hands of the Indigenous people. So with that, like, using existing measures of protection, like, you know, marine protected areas, which fall under different, you know, types of legislation, you know, it kind of makes me a little bit nervous personally, because, you know, that's DFO's idea of what a protected area is, but that is not what, you know, Indigenous people think a protected area is. So I feel like I'm going to hand it over to Trish, and she can give a better example and some light on some of the conversations that she's been having to date about this.
Yeah, thanks, Allie. Yeah, I think in Canada, most of the IPCAs to date, which there's not a lot, but they have been mostly terrestrial based. So there was originally this idea that IPCAs were going to be land based. But when we did our consultations and we realized that the story was more about just the land. And again, it's just an Indigenous way of thinking that everything is interconnected. And at first, everyone was like, oh my God, if you go into the water, there's going to be all these issues. And we were like, we're pushing the agenda. We have to get government to stop thinking in silos and to work together. So, and the bottom line for us is, when people hear marine protected area, I don't really like the protected, again, because it's this colonial approach. They feel like they're not going to be able to do something, where an Indigenous protected and conserved area is about, for us, keeping people on the land and the water, not restricting it. Of course, I mean, I saw someone just put up a question about enforcement. I don't think it would be the heavy-handed enforcement. We have, like Allie said, guardians or earth keepers. So these are people who would be the caretakers and ensure that there was respect for everything in an IPCA. So yeah, no, the marine issue is a big one right now in Canada, and hopefully we will be able to push that agenda so that it's not just terrestrial and marine anymore, but it's just a holistic approach to protection and caring. I don't know, Allison, if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, I think you covered everything, you know. It's all interconnected, and I know that I said I'm moving up to terrestrial side, but it's, you know, again, it's when we talk in specifics like terrestrial and aquatic, it's only because that's where the funding comes from, and that's kind of the immediate focus. But when we, sorry, the puppy really wants to go out right now. Like if we're talking about protecting the watershed because of water quality issues, we're talking about protecting the salmon. If we're talking about protecting the salmon, we're talking about protecting the river. The river flows into the Bredor, which flows into the ocean. So there is no jurisdictions, and it's just something that we have to, sometimes we don't necessarily say it, but it's always in that bigger picture landscape view. So yeah. I'm gonna go let the dog out. I'll be right back.
There. Thank you. Maybe Sheila. It seems like we may have questions.
There we are. Okay. Well, hello. I think all of the people who are on the screen tonight are people I haven't met, but at any rate, I'm a long-time environmentalist myself, and I spent the first 10 years of my over 30-year career of working in these areas, working on wilderness preservation. And that was exciting and very, very rewarding. And it was all new, you know, because we were able to get the protected, we started with the 12% protected areas that were recommended in the Brundtland Commission report. And we were actually able to roll out that across the country because we had the wonderful strength of the Canadian Environmental Network and the provincial network. So that's the way. So, you know, having come from that Western framework and also having been so touched and so moved by the knowledge and experience of the many Indigenous people that I've had the pleasure of working with, not just Canadian Indigenous people, but from many other countries in the world as well. I just find what you've had to say, this last discussion that we're having, is so important. I'm also an environment and health expert, and what I'm always talking about is the interrelationship between all things. And I've actually said that I think that is the great lesson that is in front of humanity right now. And it's not so much a learning of the interconnection of all things, it's a remembering. And the exciting thing for me about working with Indigenous people over the years has been that for the most part, you know, this is a generalized statement, but my experience is for the most part, Indigenous people, even if they're living in urban areas, they have not lost touch with the spirit of the land. So I'm, you know, as we get toward the end of tonight's session, I am so excited about what is being presented for this work. And because I think, even though right now it's talking about, you know, Indigenous protected areas, what is being unrolled here is an intelligence that we need, you know, in all of our systems. And of course, having worked all this time with federal and provincial departments that are all siloed, as you say, you know, so we, as we go forward, you know, we need to move things into so much more of a holistic way of thinking. And this is the model. So I think the potential for this to influence and have dramatic effect across the board is very exciting. Thank you so much for all of you, what you've been presenting and the work that you have in front of you. Very exciting.
Well said, Sheila. Thank you. I guess as kind of, I feel like we should wrap with Sheila's comments there. I do just want to make sure, Camille, that we kind of did get your question answered. I know Trish did touch on the enforcement. I'm not sure if you still are looking for more of a kind of dialogue about that, or if Allison or Allie or Trish want to revisit this question in the chat as well, just about enforcement on IPCAs and protecting species and species at risk in the event of violation of them in these areas. They're asking, would it be like the first Nova Scotia Biodiversity Act had in its original form of enforcement on private lands before it was watered down by the commercial forestry industry, and the last Liberal government? Does anyone want to address Camille's question a little bit more than
I'll just say this. I think it depends on the mechanisms that the IPCA chooses to move forward. There's no specific legislation to say this is an IPCA, but there are examples across Canada of tribal parks. And there are instances where, depending on the area, there may be a willingness to say designate it as a wilderness area, and the regulations and things, enforcement opportunities that come through it. So I think it's going to depend on the area and what the governance of the IPCA requires. For ours, we don't know yet. Any private land acquired is going to go under the Conservancy, and there's certain conditions of being a land trust and activities that can occur on the land. So that in itself will kind of create the guidelines for those portions of the land. And then the Crown land portion, we are going to have to go into a negotiation, and whether it's going to be a co-governance, co-management setup, we're not sure yet. So, but ultimately, like Trish said, there are guardians that can go on the land and educate people. For instance, we're having an issue just with ATV use and, and not understanding some of the sensitive habitats that are in the area. And just through talking with people, the ATV group itself decided to take measures so that people couldn't go in those areas anymore. And it's not necessarily hardcore enforcement or policing, but it's education and just putting in simple things like maybe dropping a tree across the trails and then and doing some signage, things like that. So I think it's going to be unique, and I think it's going to depend on how the people who are establishing the IPCA kind of see it going forward. I don't know if Allie and Trish want to add anything to that.
No, I don't think a heavy-handed approach ever really works. We were having this discussion. We went out to Glooscap yesterday, and the elders are saying it's all about respect, right? If you respect an area and you respect the spirituality and what the area holds, then, and you have a connection with that, then you're going to care for it. So like Allison said, it really is all about education, experience, and learning from each other. So
Beautiful. Lots of education to be done for sure. I don't know, Allie, if you wanted to add anything as a last kind of wrap up. No,
I think they've said it all.
beautiful. Okay, well, I think then if we don't really have any other questions, we can start to wrap this up tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Thank you, Trish, Allie, and Allison, for sharing so much about this. On the same topic of education and raising awareness, and also just kind of empowering youth with IPCAs, I do want to take note that Corey is actually here, and Corey is one part of Rising Youth, who is actually sponsoring this event today. And he does have some really cool information about these awesome grants for youth-led community projects that I think, whether you're a youth or not, we probably all know youth that would be eligible for these and that these could really do a lot of good with. So Corey, I'll hand it off to you to just maybe give everyone a brief little explanation about what the grants are and how we could spread the information about them so that we can get more community projects supported.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jess. So my name is Corey Herc, and I work in partnership development and outreach with Rising Youth. I am responsible for our partnerships throughout the Atlantic region, as well as a little bit of the prairies. But personally, I'm located here in Mi'kma'ki in the Sicknick district, what's currently known as Moncton. And my role is to basically make sure that anybody who works with folks who may be interested in accessing these grants, or to connect directly with the folks who are interested in accessing these grants, make sure that they know anything that they need to know to access our funding. So we serve individuals aged 15 to 30, anywhere from coast to coast to coast. and we can fund pretty much anything as long as it is led by someone 15 to 30, beneficial to a community that they work with or are a part of, and volunteer led. It's not their job to do it. So you can use the grants to pay other people. We have funded everything from trips for a couple of youth to take a skidoo up and go ice fishing in their traditional territory for the first time, all the way up to funding multi-day conferences. We do mental health workshops, we do board game nights, we do hiking trips, camping trips, community meals, pretty much anywhere that there's somebody in that age range of 15 to 30 who knows that there's something that folks in their community need. We're eligible, or we're able to work with them to make sure that their idea is eligible, fundable, and ready to go. So this series here over the last couple of days and tonight has been funded with one of our grants. We probably have about another 6 weeks of funding left before we run out for the year. We get our funding every spring, we run it until it's gone. And so I see that the NSEN and Jess have both posted in the chat here where you can find our grants. But I'm going to drop my email address in here as well. So it's Corey@takingitglobal.org. And you can go to fes.risingyouth.ca if you want to check out our applications. You can drop me a line by email. And if you have any questions, I'm here with you tonight too, and I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. Do we have any questions for Corey? Or no, maybe we'll do some digging first, but okay, cool. Thank you, Corey. Well, they're awesome
No
grants.
problem.
Honestly, we've been trying to talk about them with everybody, and especially as we're talking about like land-based learning activities or all of these things. If you know youth that would be interested in kind of getting connected with the community and talking about these IPCAs, this is a great way to get this supported. And Corey's like, please apply for these grants. So trying to spread the information about it for sure. And yeah, I guess that kind of, unless Corey, do you have anything else to add or?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I
Beautiful.
just do want to stress that the grants are very trust-based, that pretty much anything you tell me your community needs, my job is to trust you that you know your community better than I do. And that if you tell me there's a need, you're probably right because you're living it and I'm not. So my job is to listen, to trust, and to show up. Youth-led, volunteer-driven, community benefiting.
Awesome. Cool. Like I said, yes, very cool initiative. Thank you so much for sponsoring tonight. And thank you everybody for attending. I know this is wild to be showing up in this transitionary phase where everyone's getting kind of sick. All of a sudden I feel like I'm hearing, and it's a weeknight. So we appreciate everybody showing up. We appreciate everybody listening and being kind and respectful. Amanda and I have been so grateful to be able to be a part of this with everyone. So thank you to NSEN. Dylan, I don't know if you want to hop on and say anything, but thank you so much to our speakers tonight. Allie, Trish, Allison, you've given us a lot to think about and a lot for us to keep learning about. So I'd say everyone remember these call to actions that everyone has been talking about. Continue to stay engaged. And if you do have any questions, or if you're a little spooked about sharing your camera and audio in these big group settings, we'll all be kind of staying a little past the minute mark here in case you have any questions that you want to just ask us directly. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'll leave it to the floor if anybody else wants to add anything, Dylan or Jeff, or thumbs up from Jeff. He's good. Dylan.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was a great presentation. I'm going to stick around. I have a few questions I'd like to ask. But yeah, thanks everyone, and really appreciate your time this evening.
Beautiful. Have a good night, everybody.